Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my house and welcome to this first course on Shakespeare's problem plays and on the romances. In 1600 or 1601, Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. The other great tragedies, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, but also Antony and Cleopatra and Coriolanus, were probably composed in the period from 1604 to 1608. Between Hamlet and the other mature tragedies, Shakespeare penned three puzzling and frustrating plays: Troilus and Cressida, All's Well That Ends Well, and Measure for Measure. In 1896, Frederick Boas called them, faute de mieux, problem plays, and subsequent critics readily adopted this term. The Italian scholar Giorgio Melchiori called them drammi dialettici, dialectical drama. Sometimes Hamlet is added to this group of texts, united by an ethical and moral questioning that leads to a disillusioned view of love and power. The problem plays are neither tragedies nor comedies, neither histories nor romances. These hybrid plays are thus devoid of both tragic grandeur and erotic grace. The nihilism and sex nausea that dominate Hamlet sway here too. The world is still out of joint. Things are as rotten in Troy and in the Greek camp as in the state of Denmark. Copulation thrives in a sterile way. For Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships and the easily won and easily lost Cressida are barren strumpets. Achilles and Patroclus are hopeless effeminates. Let us note before we start reading Troilus and Cressida that Shakespeare decided to recycle here one of the most famous stories of the West. The tale of loving Troilus and false Cressida had been told many times since Benoît de Saint-Maur invented it as a minor episode of his Roman de Troie, written around 1155-1160. Benoît's verse romance was translated into Latin prose by Guido delle Colonne in the 13th century, and was adapted into Italian in Giovanni Boccaccio's chivalric poem in octaves, Filostrato, around 1335. Half a century later, Chaucer used Boccaccio in his long poem Troilus and Cressida, which ends with the famous envoy. Middle English now. Go little book, go little min tragedier, there got the marker yet, that he dear, so send the maid to mark in some comedy. Note that Chaucer calls his story a tragedy, but Beck's got to help him write a comedy as well before he dies. In Chaucer's poem, as in Boccaccio's Filostrato, Troilus is killed by Achilles some time after Cressida's betrayal. His soul ascends to heaven and, looking down upon the world, expresses a contemptus mundi in Christian terms. Shakespeare, however, allows his Troilus to survive his disgrace, which is, one may argue, considerably more cruel. After Chaucer, the story can be found in the first book printed in English, Caxton's Recueil of the Histories of Troy, stamped in Ghent or Bruges in 1473. In 1532, Robert Henryson published a Testament of Cressida. In this poem, Cressida goes blind and ugly from leprosy after her betrayal, and encounters Troilus later by accident. Although he does not recognize her, Troilus is reminded of his love and leaves the wretched woman all his fortune. When they unveil their identities, the two lovers are overcome by emotions, and Cressida soon dies. We are still in the courtly mode, right? Finally, since 1598, George Chapman had been publishing installments of his translation of the Iliad. Thus, even if Shakespeare had only little Latin and less Greek, as Ben Jonson wrote, and some doubt, he now had access to the portraits of Hector, Achilles, Ulysses, and Thersites. In 1602, Shakespeare was thus able to draw on, nay, to toy with, two immense yet already decrepit traditions: Homer's ancient heroic epic and Chaucer's medieval courtly love romance. Like Cervantes, and like our postmodern writers, or neither as post nor as modern as they believe. Shakespeare uses and abuses the traditions that provide him his heroes and their outlook. The courtly pomp, the chivalric eloquence, and the Christian magnanimity of Hector seem obsolete and ineffective in a world of betrayal, prostitution, lechery, and envy. In an equally distressing way, all ancient dignity seems to have deserted the Greeks' camp, where Achilles' heroism has lapsed into narcissism, lechery, and cowardice. Agamemnon's majesty is overshadowed by Menelaus's horns. Nestor's wisdom and Ulysses' realpolitik are corrupted by cynicism and annulled by Ajax's symmetrical stupidity and by Thersites' constant slanders. Briefly put, ancient heroic and medieval chivalric virtues can no longer function as the ingredients of tragic destinies and sublime love. This is a corrupt, cynical, garrulous, and inconsistent world in which only Hector, the noblest of characters, is allowed to die, yet cannot redeem anything. But I have run before my horse to market. The story first. Actually, there are more stories. The love story can be summarized very easily. Troilus, one of King Priam's younger sons, is in love with a daughter of the Trojan defector Calchas. The girl's uncle, Pandarus, serves as a go-between and successfully procures his niece Cressida for Troilus. As easily bedded as wood, Cressida spends a night's embrace with Troilus before she is sent to her father, thus becoming a mere commodity traded for a noble Trojan prisoner. Before leaving, she exchanges vows of fidelity with Troilus. The warrior Diomedes accompanies her to the Greek camp and woos her in the process. When she reaches the Greek tents, all the Achaean generals kiss her in a memorable scene. As befits a disenchanted raisonneur, Ulysses interjects. Fie! Fie upon her! There's a language in her eye, her cheek, her lip, nay, her foot speaks. Her wanton spirits look out at every joint and motive of her body. Troilus, Cressida yields to Diomedes as easily as she had yielded to Troilus. She even gives the Achaean the sleeve that the Trojan prince had offered her, and Diomedes hangs it to his helmet as a love and war trophy. An exchange of letters, there are more such epistolary exchanges in Chaucer, I must say, betrays Cressida's falseness to grieving Troilus. On the first occasion, the two rival men chase each other, but their duel is burlesque, aborted, and causes no more harm than the quarrel opposing Demetrius and Lysander in the dark forest of Athens. Although the title would suggest that the focus falls on Troilus and Cressida's love story, by the reckoning of the Arden editor Kenneth Palmer, the love plot occupies only 33% of the play. The Greek and Trojan fights and councils, which should provide the backdrop of the love story, stifle it and cast it in the background, which is as cruel as it is ingenious. In the great order of the world, and in the great disorder of both amorous and martial affairs, what matters the erotic infatuation of a sneaking fellow with the daughter of game? When Ulysses talks, Achilles is angry and Hector falls. Who has the time to care about the juvenile pangs of despised love? Seen against the great drama of the war, culminating with Hector's death, Troilus and Cressida's love story is puny, ridiculous, insignificant. And yet, the Trojan War itself, the epic clash of civilizations, was triggered by a similar love affair. To put it more bluntly, in the words of deformed and slandering Thersites, all the argument is a whore and a cuckold, a good quarrel to draw emulous factions and bleed to death upon. Troilus and Cressida are only the junior and less catastrophic version of Paris and Helen. Why should we care how they strut and fret their hour upon the stage? In Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida, the entire poem is dedicated to this unfortunate love. It takes Troilus 2.5 books and about 4,000 lines to win Cressida in Chaucer's poem. Their love lasts another book, and the betrayal occupies the 5th one. As C.S. Lewis argues in his Allegory of Love, and I quote, "In the Cressida of the first 3 books, Chaucer has painted a touching and beautiful picture of a woman by nature both virtuous and amorous, but above all, affectionate. A woman who in a chaste society would certainly have lived a chaste widow. But she lives nominally in Troy, really in 14th century England, where love is the greatest of earthly goods, and love has nothing to do with marriage. If in such circumstances, Lewis says, she yields, she commits no sin against the social code of her age and country. By Christian standards forgivable, by the rules of courtly love needing no forgiveness." This is what Lewis thinks about Cressida. In Shakespeare's play, however, Cressida is a woman of quick sense, as Nestor remarks, but so are most of Shakespeare's erotic heroines, from Juliet and Rosalind to Cleopatra. When we first meet her, Cressida appears frivolous, witty, and utterly unimpressed by her suitor Troilus. Her discussion with Pandarus is peppered with sexual puns. Pandarus says, "Do you know what a man is? Is not birth, beauty, good shape, discourse, manhood, learning, gentleness, virtue, youth, liberality, and such like, the spice and salt that season a man?" "I, a minced man," Cressida answers, "and then to be baked with no date in the pie, for then the man's date is out." "You are such a woman," Pandarus says, "one knows not at what ward you lie. Upon my back to defend my belly, upon my wit to defend my wiles, upon my secrecy to defend mine honesty, my mask to defend my beauty, and you to defend all these, and at all these wards I lie at 1,000 watches." A minced man may mean a eunuch, and the date in the pie probably refers to a man's addition. When the man's date is out, he is out of date or useless. Cressida's lying on her back to defend her belly calls to mind the nurse's dirty puns regarding Juliet falling upon her back when she has more wit. Finally, when Cressida says that she lies at 1,000 watches, we hear the typical Shakespearean pun about lying to someone and lying with someone. "For lying so, Hermia, I do not lie," Lysander tells his loved one in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Pandarus continues the bawdy talk with further sexual metaphors like hitting, blowing, and swelling past hiding, familiar to us also from Romeo and Juliet. Although a young virgin like Juliet, Cressida is not naive. She knows perfectly well that Pandarus is a bawd, and that, I quote, "Women are angels wooing. Things won are done. Joy's soul lies in the doing. That she beloved knows naught that knows not this. Men prize the thing ungained more than it is." Yet, ironically, she yields to Troilus as easily as Juliet does to Romeo, kisses on the first date, and unlike Hermia in A Midsummer Night's Dream, lies with her lover that very night, rather than further off in human modesty. When on the first date Troilus asks her why she was so hard to win, Cressida answers, "Hard to seem won, but I was won, my lord, with the first glance." In the lengthy ensuing explanation, she plays again with the meanings of "I lie," and ends by asking Troilus to stop her mouth. Troilus promptly kisses her, and Cressida coyly pretends that was not my purpose thus to beg a kiss. This scene brings to mind the conceited sonnet that leads to Romeo and Juliet's first kiss. after summoning images of pilgrims touching and kissing saints' statues. Although the kiss comes as quickly as in Romeo and Juliet, and the love that follows is as sensual and sexual as in the earlier play, this passion fails to obliterate everything else. It is as intense as any youthful passion, sexual and gallant as befits the medieval courtly love tradition, and ends in forced separation as in Romeo and Juliet. Yet, it is devoid of sublime declarations and declamations, and will vanish into thin air in the morning following the night's embraces. Ironically, in the scene following this one, that is to say Act 3, Scene 3, which we must understand as happening at the same time though, the Greeks decide to exchange Antenor for Cressida. The lovers' fate is sealed, and we may well believe that Troilus and Cressida are, like Romeo and Juliet, fools of time or star-crossed lovers. After all, Cressida is exchanged like a commodity and cannot be blamed for what is happening to her. At least such is the case in Chaucer's poem. Shakespeare could have used this ambiguity, and that would have befit his taste. Cressida could well have been presented as a victim of masculine violence, or of patriarchy, if I were to speak in fashionable feminist terms, which I shun. But she is none of that. Shakespeare is not rewriting, but destroying Juliet. The kiss scene is rewritten with a touch of burlesque, and perhaps even grotesque exaggeration. When Cressida is kissed in a frenzy by the Greek generals, Agamemnon, Nestor, Achilles, and Patroclus. "'Twere better she were kissed in general," Ulysses says. After everyone has kissed a girl, Ulysses jokes. I quote, "May I, sweet lady, beg a kiss of you?" "You may," Cressida says. Ulysses, "I do desire it." Cressida, "Why, beg too." Ulysses, "Why then, for Venus' sake, give me a kiss." "When Helen is a maid again," and his. Cressida answers, "I am your debtor. Claim it when 'tis due." Ulysses, "Never's my day, and then a kiss of you." This kissing frenzy is interrupted by Diomedes, Cressida's soon-to-be lover, who was sent to fetch her to her father. Ulysses aptly decodes the scene and its protagonist. "Fie, fie upon her! There's language in her eye, her cheek, her lip, nay, her foot speaks. Her wanton spirits look out at every joint and motive of her body. Oh, these encounterers, so glib of tongue, that give accosting welcome ere it comes, and wide unclasp the tables of their thoughts to every ticklish reader. Set them down for slutty spoils of opportunity and daughters of the game." Ulysses' thoughts are interrupted by a flourish of the trumpet with which Hector promised to summon one noble Greek to duel. The flourish makes all generals exclaim at once, "The Trojan's trumpet!" It is impossible not to hear, like A.P. Rossiter, the Trojan strumpet in this unanimous cry. Frivolous, flimsy and flippant, Cressida is just the strumpet who will sing any man at first sight, as Ulysses later tells Troilus. Troilus thus becomes another Menelaus, and crooked, villainous, heinous Thersites seems to be right. All the argument is a cuckold and a whore. Note Shakespeare's genius here. The Trojan's trumpet announces the play's martial climax, the fight between the greatest of all Trojans and the best of the Achaeans. I also hint here at Gregory Nodge's book. The trumpet stands for war and honor, for heroism and glory, but when it sounds, we hear the word strumpet. The Greek generals comment on the burlesque scene that we have just witnessed and on its trumpeted diva. Jan Kott insists on the play's buffa tone, but they also announce the forthcoming fight. Let me remind you at this point that 2/3 of the play are occupied by Greek-Trojan battles and debates, rather than by Cressida's ébat amoureux, to speak French. Troilus's suffering would stir sublime emotions, and perhaps a furtive tear, if its cause were not such a frivolous girl. These lines could sound Hamletian, if only Troilus were faced with a deceased love or with an incestuous mother. I quote, "Instance, oh instance, strong as Pluto's gates, Cressida is mine, tied with the bonds of heaven. Instance, oh instance, strong as heaven itself, the bonds of heaven are slipped, dissolved, and loosed." The world is indeed out of joint. But Cressida is just a trivial crack, and Troilus's despair looks ridiculous, as will be his unheroic chasing of Diomedes in search of a duel and a revenge that will never take place. There is a general atmosphere of moral dissolution among the Trojans, and even more so among the Greeks. When we first met the Achaeans in the 3rd scene of the 1st act, they were sitting in council to discuss the disorder afflicting their troops. Lost in his lust for Patroclus, Achilles was refusing to fight and was undermining the war. I quote, "The great Achilles, whom opinion crowns the sinew and the forehand of our host, having his ear full of his airy fame, grows dainty of his worth, and in his tent lies mocking our designs. With him Patroclus, upon a lazy bed the livelong day, breaks scurril jests." Similarly, Ajax allows himself to be poisoned by Thersites' slanders against Agamemnon and the other generals. I quote again, "Ajax is grown self-willed, and bears his head in such a rein, in full as proud a place as broad Achilles. Keeps his tent like him, makes factious feasts, rails on our state of war, bold as an oracle, and sets Thersites, a slave whose gall coins slanders like a mint, to match us in comparisons with dirt, to weaken and discredit our exposure." This situation leads the polytropic Ulysses to formulate his Hobbesian political theory about degree, that is to say hierarchical order. I quote, "The specialty of rule hath been neglected, and look how many Grecian tents stand hollow upon this plain, so many hollow factions, when that the general is not like the hive, to whom the foragers shall all repair, what honey is expected? Degree being visited, the unworthiest shows as fairly in the mask. The heavens themselves, the planets and this centre observe degree, priority and place, incisure, course, proportion, season, form, office and custom in all line of order. How could communities, degrees in schools and brotherhoods in cities, peaceful commerce from dividable shores, the primogenitive and due of birth, prerogative of age, crowns, sceptres, laurels, but by degree stand in authentic place? Take but degree away, untune that string, and hark what discord follows. Each thing meets in mere repugnancy. The bounded waters should lift their bosoms higher than the shores, and make a sop of all this solid globe. Strength should be lord of imbecility, and the rude son should strike his father dead. Force should be right, or rather right and wrong, between whose endless jar justice resides, should lose their names, and so should justice too. Then everything includes itself in power, power into will, will into appetite, and appetite, a universal wolf, so doubly seconded with will and power, must make perforce a universal prey, and last eat up itself. Great Agamemnon, this chaos when degrees suffocate follows the choking. To end a tale of length, Troy in our weakness stands, not in her strength. All is not lost, however. For the Greeks can also avail themselves of Agamemnon's majesty, of Nestor's wisdom, and of Ulysses' wit. Shakespeare carefully creates a contrast here between brains and brawns, between smart and virtuous Nestor and Ulysses, and dull and decadent Achilles and Ajax. Similarly, in the Trojan camp, mature and heroic Hector and Aeneas are opposed to the immature sensualists Paris and Troilus. However, it may be remarked, it is hero who dies, and not in a heroic duel, but murdered cowardly. Nestor is perhaps more than just a doting, if well-meaning old fool like Polonius, Gloucester and Gonzalo, but moral decay is so advanced that Ulysses can only be a disenchanted raisonneur, like Anabarbus. In the Iliad, Achilles is the best of the Achaeans, a demigod of superhuman stature, whereas in Shakespeare's play he is in every respect despicable. He preserves only fragments of his Homeric grandeur, and perhaps only the comparison to Thersites, the worst of the Achaeans, can save him. It is perhaps instructive, at this point, to take a look at the only passage from the Iliad where Thersites appears. In Book 2, before the Greek expedition set sail, Thersites speaks against it and slanders the Achaean leaders in the hope of eliciting general laughter. His crooked shape heralds his crooked words. I am quoting here from Chapman's Homer. All said and audience gave. Thersites only would speak all. A most disordered store of words he foolishly poured out, of which his mind held more than it could manage. Anything with which he could procure laughter he never could contain. He should have yet been sure to touch no kings. To oppose their state becomes not jesters' parts. But he, the filthiest fellow was, of all that had deserts in Troy's brave siege. He was squint-eyed and lamed of either foot, so crook-backed that he had no breast, sharp-headed, where did shoot, here and there spursed, thin mossy hair. He most of all envied Ulysses and Aeschines, whom still his spleen would chide. Nor could the sacred king himself avoid his saucy vein, against whom, since he knew the Greeks did vehement hate sustain, being angry for Achilles' wrong, he cried out, railing thus. And now he speaks. Atreides, why complainst thou now? What wouldst thou more of us? Thy tents are full of brass, and dames, the choice of all, are thine, with whom we must present thee first, when any town resigns. To our invasion. Want'st thou then, besides all this, more gold from Troy's knights to redeem their sons, whom to be dearly sold I or some other Greek must take? Or wouldst thou yet again force from some other lord his praise, to soothe the lusts that reign in thine encroaching appetite? It fits no prince to be a prince of ill, and govern us, or lead our progeny by rape to ruin. Base Greek deserving infamy, and ills eternal! Greekish girls, not Greeks ye are, come fly home with our ships. Leave this man here to perish with his praise. Homer calls Thersites' words akosma, disordered, the privative of kosmos, which designates the world and order. It is impossible not to hear Ulysses' speech about degree here. The order Ulysses means is both cosmic and microcosmic, human, social, moral, that is. Thersites is foolish and deformed, like Shakespeare's Caliban, and fulfills both in Homer and in Shakespeare the same monstrous function, namely he demonstrates something. As a fool, he hates Ulysses most. As a crooked dwarf, he hates the splendid giant Achilles. As a vile man, he hates the majesty of Agamemnon, against whom he rails. Homer calls Thersites Aeschistos, most base, and Echistos, most hateful. Thersites accuses Agamemnon of being a base sensualist, whose goal is to glut his desire of gold and his lust for young women. He thus drags the king down from majesty into the mire of his own moral decay. His purpose is not noble, for he does not wish to instruct or to advise, but to slander and to stir laughter, geloion in Greek. As Aristotle explains in his Poetics, laughter is intrinsic to baseness. In Shakespeare's play, Thersites is a bitter fool, bitterer than Lear's fool, who has some wisdom in store, bitterer even than Caliban, who at least is given some touching poetry. A consummate hater, an absolute misanthrope, worse than Timon of Athens, who had objective cause for his misanthropy, Thersites can only slander men, women, and mankind in general. I quote, "Agamemnon is a fool to offer to command Achilles. Achilles is a fool to be commanded of Agamemnon. Thersites is a fool to serve such a fool, and Patroclus is a fool positive." When he is introduced in Act 2, Scene 1, Thersites is cursing Agamemnon, just as Caliban enters the stage, cursing Prospero. Thersites wishes Agamemnon had running boils, and greets Ajax, who strikes him in order to elicit an answer, with the following words. I quote, "The plague of Greece upon thee, thou mongrel beef-witted lord." As Gregory Nodge demonstrates, in the Iliad, Thersites represents blame poetry opposed to epos, satire opposed to epic heroism, the low style opposed to the high one. His very name suggests boldness, thersos, and his speech is characterized by eris, strife, neikos, quarrel, oneidos, blame, and elenchos, reproach. However, Thersites' reproachful and quarrelsome baseness is not allowed to dominate the Iliad, and the fool is soon stinted. Ulysses chides Thersites for his foolish diatribe, for his words that lack moderation, ametroepes in Greek, and cannot be sorted out, akritomythos, and strikes him into silence. I quote from Chapman's Homer. "Straight stood up to him divine Ulysses, who with looks exceeding grave and grim the bitter check gave. Cease, vain fool, to vent thy railing vein on kings thus, though it serve thee well, nor think thou canst restrain with that thy railing faculty their wills in least degree. For not a worse of all this host came with our king than thee to Troy's great siege. Therefore this thy rude vein makes me vow, which shall be curiously observed if ever I shall hear this madness from thy mouth again. Let not Ulysses bear this head, nor be the father called of young Telemachus, if to thy nakedness I take and strip thee not, and thus whip thee to fleet from counsel. Send with sharp stripes, weeping hence, this glory thou affects to rail." This said, his insolence he settled with his sceptre, stroke his back and shoulders so that bloody wails rose, and he shrunk round, and from his eyes did flow moist tears, and looking filthily he sat, feared, smarted, dried his blubbered cheeks. Poor Thersites. From now on, however, Thersites will not be heard again in Homer's poem. The Achaeans laugh heartily and approve of Ulysses' action. As Gregory Nodge put it, in the Thersites episode of the Iliad, it is epos that gets the last laugh on the blame poet, rather than the other way round. Not so in Shakespeare. Here, the bitter fool seems to have the last word. His judgments of character are right. The whole story is indeed reduced to bawds and strumpets, as he had said. All the argument is a whore and a cuckold. When we have reached Act 5, it is hard to disagree with Thersites that Achilles is, I quote, the idol of idiot worshippers, and Patroclus is Achilles' male varlet, his masculine whore. Achilles, Patroclus, Menelaus, Diomedes, Paris and Troilus proved Thersites right. In both camps there is nothing but lechery, all incontinent varlets. Lechery, lechery, still wars and lechery. Nothing else holds fashion. A burning devil takes them, Thersites said. The sexual debauchery is matched by the decay of heroic virtues. Troilus and Diomedes are denied an actual fight, and Hector, the noblest character in the play, is killed cowardly by Achilles. Hector has a vice of mercy in himself, and bids fallen Greeks rise and live. Troilus complains. "'Tis fair play," the noble Trojan answers. This fair play, however, does not characterize Achilles. When Hector and Achilles get to fight, the Greek is out of exercise and breath, and Hector allows him to withdraw. Achilles leaves Hector with these arrogant words. I quote, "I do disdain thy courtesy, proud Trojan. Be happy that my arms are out of use. My rest and negligence befriends thee not. My rest and negligence befriends thee now, but thou anon shalt hear me again. Till when, go seek thy fortune." After sparing both Ajax and Achilles, Hector considers it a vein befitting his medieval courtly virtues that fighting is over that day, and disarms. However, Achilles gathers his myrmidons, surprises disarmed Hector, and orders his men to kill him. "Come here about me, you my myrmidons. Mark what I say, attend me where I will. Strike not a stroke, but keep yourselves in breath. And when I have the bloody Hector found, impale him with your weapons. Roundabout, in fellest manner, execute your aims. Follow me, sirs, and my proceedings it is decreed, Hector the Great must die." "I am unarmed. Forgo this vantage, Greek," Hector asks. But Achilles orders his men to strike, fellows, strike! This is the man I seek. The best of the Achaeans, as Nod calls him, is only an ignoble, lecherous coward. While Achilles slays Hector ignominiously, in the previous scene, vile Thersites was allowed to live. Margarelon, one of Priam's bastard sons, spares Thersites when the abject man avows, in a frantic eulogy of bastards that reminds one of Edmund, I quote, "I am a bastard too. I love bastards. I am a bastard begot, bastard instructed, bastard in mind, bastard in valour, in everything illegitimate. One bear will not bite another, and wherefore should one bastard? Take heed, the quarrel's most ominous to us. If the son of a whore fight for a whore, he tempts judgment. Farewell, bastard." With Hector's death, the last principle of nobility and morality dissolves. Only the cowards, bastards, whores and cuckolds are allowed to survive. Yeats's Gyres comes to mind. I quote, "Hector is dead, and there's a light in Troy. We that look on but laugh in tragic joy. What matter thou, numb nightmare ride on top, and blood and mire the sensitive body stain? What matter? Heave no sigh, let no tear drop. A greater, a more gracious time has gone." The auroral heroic world of Homer's Iliad was cruel but not crude, and it was certainly greater than Shakespeare's. Chaucer's courtly universe was tragic but gracious. In the Homeric poems, heroism and wisdom have the last word. Ulysses' nobility prevails against Thersites' baseness. In Chaucer's courtly love romance, the contemptus mundi is uttered from the 8th sphere of heaven by the Christian soul of noble Troilus. Here, nobility dies and ignominy survives. As W.H. Auden remarks, we get the feeling that this is the world, not just a world. What matter? Out of cavern comes a voice, and all it knows is that one word, rejoice, to quote from Yeats again. Thersites, the bitter moral fool, appears to have the last word. But Shakespeare is even more cruel. He gives the last word to the sweet, immoral fool, to Pander the pimp. The play does not end with sublime words uttered by dying Hector, or with a eulogy of the great man spoken by Agamemnon, with Ulysses' words of wit and wisdom, with the pangs of Troilus, forgotten by now, or at least with Thersites' bitter yet justified curses. No. It ends with Pander's musings about his syphilitic ending, with this old fool's blabber about boars and horse from Winchester. You realize we are no longer in Troy. I quote, "Brethren and sisters of the hold door trade, some 2 months hence my will shall here be made. It should be now, but that my fear is this, some galled goose of Winchester would hiss. Till then I'll sweat and seek about for eases, and at that time bequeath you my diseases." Troilus and Cressida ends low, in irredeemable pus, in dirty body fluids, in the abyss of biology, whence reason, love, heroism, and any soaring aspiration have been banished. We are here at Shakespeare's lowest, where neither comedy nor its merry marriages, nor tragic catharsis can save a world of whores and cuckolds. Not a world, but the world. But do not despair. Things look brighter in the next play we shall discuss. All's well that ends well. Until then, goodbye.
Of all the birds that I do know, Philip my sparrow hath no peer. For sit she high or sit she low, be she far off or be she near, there is no bird so fair, so fine, nor yet so fresh as this of mine. For when she once hath felt the fit, Philip will cry still yet,